Hola, ¿qué tal? Soy Rigo Cisnado. Sean bienvenidos nuevamente a esto que es CAF Virtual. El día de hoy, el maestro Javier Jaramillo nos hablará acerca del significado del número 432 y todo lo que esconde este número detrás de él. Así que, si están listos, comenzamos.
Hello and welcome to this evening's live lecture over the cultural mirror, the significance of the number 432. I'm excited to be with you today, and I look forward to um, giving you some interesting information over this number that has been with us since the beginning of time, really. We'll find out. Hola, bienvenidos a esta conferencia en vivo sobre el espejo cultural, el significado del número 432. Estoy encantado aquí hablando con ustedes, ofreciendo información sobre el número 432, un número que ha estado con nosotros desde el principio del tiempo. Why is the number 432 of importance in our culture? Why do we see it repeated in different patterns, especially in biblical accounts? ¿Por qué el número 432 es importante en nuestra cultura? ¿Por qué lo vemos repetido en diferentes patrones, especialmente en relatos bíblicos? Well, in biblical account, there were 10 patriarchs between Adam and Noah, who are known as the Addams family. They're really known as the Addams family, who also lived long lives, right? The total years, adjusting for the massive overlap in their lives because they lived so long, add up to 1,656. In that number of years, there were 86,400 weeks, or exactly twice 43,200. Curiously, the number of seconds in a 24-hour day is 86,400, which when divided in half is 43,200, which gives us the number 432. Bueno, en el relato bíblico había 10 patriarcas entre Adán y Noé, también conocido como la familia de Adán, que también vivieron una larga vida. En total de años, ajustado en superposición masiva en sus vidas, suma 1,656. En esta cantidad de años hay 86,400 semanas, o exactamente el doble de 43,200. Curiosamente, la cantidad de segundos en un día de 24 horas es 86,400, que cuando se divide por la mitad es 43,200. O 432. In The Inner Reaches of Outer Space by Joseph Campbell, Campbell discusses the similarities between the Babylonian and Genesis flood stories. In the Babylonian story, there were 10 kings who lived very long lives from the creation to the time of the flood. A period of time given as 432,000 years. Zechariah Stitchin reckons that time frame to be 445,000 years ago, with the flood pegged at 13,000 years ago. If you do the math, it equals 432,000 years. And The Inner Reaches of Outer Space by Joseph Campbell, Campbell analiza la similitud entre las historias de inundación de Babilonia y Génesis. En la historia de Babilonia hubo 10 reyes que vivieron una vida muy larga desde la creación hasta el momento del diluvio, un periodo de tiempo estimado como 432,000 años. Zachariah Stitchin calcula que el periodo de tiempo es de hace 442,000 años, con la inundación fijada en 13,000 años atrás. Si hace los cálculos, es igual a 432,000 años o 432, el número. To reconcile taking half of 86,400 to obtain 43,200, one should note the ancient tradition of seeing a cycle as 1/2 waning and 1/2 waxing, as in the lunar cycle. The day thus has 24 hours, or 2 sets of 12 hours, 12 hours of waxing sun, followed by 12 hours of waning sun. 12 is, in fact, considered the celestial holy number, 7 being the down-to-earth holy number. Additionally, in Revelation 12, the woman with child has a crown of 12 stars. Para conciliar tomar la mitad de 86,400 para obtener 43,200, se debe de tener la cuenta de antigua tradición de ver un ciclo como la mitad mengante y la mitad creciente, como el ciclo lunar. Por tanto, el día tiene 24 horas o 2 series de 12 horas. 12 horas de sol creciente, seguidos de 12 horas del sol mengante. El 12 es, de hecho, considerado un número sagrado celestial. El 7 es el número sagrado con los pies en la tierra. Además, en Apocalipsis 12, la mujer encinta tiene una corona de 12 estrellas. The New Jerusalem has 12 gates, angles, and pearls. And the symbol of the heart chakra is a 12-petal lotus flower. La Nueva Jerusalén tiene 12 puertas, ángeles y perlas. Y el símbolo de chakra del corazón es una flor de loto de 12 pétalos. John Mitchell, author of City of Revelation, shows a diagram of the New Jerusalem plan based on St. John's vision. John Mitchell, autor de City of Revelation, muestra un diagrama de plan de la Nueva Jerusalén basado en la visión de San Juan. It is 12 circles in a ring, with a 12-pointed star inside formed by 4 overlapping triangles. The zodiac is often depicted in a similar way. If you take the circles to the 360-degree each and multiply them, the number of circles, the total equals 4,320. Tiene 12 círculos en forma de anillo con una estrella de 12 puntas de su interior, formada por 4 triángulos superpuestos. El zodiaco es menudo se representa de manera similar. Si tomas los círculos en 360 grados cada uno y lo multiplica por el número de círculos, en total es 4,312. The Kali Yuga time cycle of the Eastern religions is also 432,000 years, while the other 3 ages of the grand cycles are multiples of 432,000 years, with the total of 4 cycles being 4,320,000 years. El ciclo de tiempo, Kali Yuga, de las religiones orientales también es de 432,000 años, mientras que las otras 3 edades de gran ciclo son múltiplos de 432,000 años, siendo en total de los 4 ciclos 320,000 años. Muy interesante. Very interesting how this number keeps showing up. Este número se repite y se repite y se repite. ¿Y qué significa? Pues vamos a ver. Here we have an interesting, and I say interesting because it is an interesting fact. Here's an interesting fact. The manufacturer of golf balls once did a test to find the ideal number of dimples to put on golf balls. It turned out that the balls with, guess what, 432 dimples went farther than the rest. Aquí tenemos un hecho interesante. Un fabricante de pelotas de golf hizo una vez una prueba para encontrar el número ideal de hoyuelos para poner en las pelotas de golf. Resultó que las bolas con 432 hoyuelos iban más lejos que el resto. 432 is also a fundamental part of geometry numbering system. That seems to be based on adding the number 36. Two of the resulting numbers are 1,656 and 25,920. Others are 144 or 144,000 and 1,260, which also appears in Revelation. Each number had a meaning. 432, for example, means consecration. El número 432 es también parte fundamental en un sistema de numeración de geometría, que parece basarse en sumar el número 36. Dos de los números resultantes son 1656 y 25,920. Otros con 144 o 144,000 y 1260 que también aparecen en el Apocalipsis. Cada número tiene un significado. 432, por ejemplo, significa consagración. Some believe these numbers were placed in the Bible to transmit messages across time itself. Carl Monk has shown that these numbers were part of a very ancient system of positioning ancient sites around the world. Algunos creen que estos números se colocaron en la Biblia para transmitir mensajes a través del tiempo. Carl Monk ha demostrado que estos números eran parte de un sistema muy antiguo para ubicar sitios antiguos en todo el mundo. Now, I'd like to share a video of sonic geometry, which is where we think that the importance of the number 432 was derived, and maybe how a frequency-based language has come about. Ahora me gustaría compartir un video sobre geometría sónica, que es donde pensamos que se derivó la importancia del número 432 y tal vez cómo surgió un lenguaje basado en frecuencias. Aquí tenemos el video. Here we have the video.
It has been said that if there is ever to be such a thing as a true universal language, it will most likely be expressed in the realms of mathematics, geometry, energy patterns, and frequency. Could it be that this language, or at least the foundation of it, already exists here on Earth? Is it possible that over the course of thousands of years, we have been somehow guided in the process of creating this new form of communication? And if so, what type of information will be conveyed through it that could not be expressed any other way? In the search for answers, we must be prepared to trek through both time and space, to open our eyes and minds wide enough to notice compelling coincidences, and to stand back far enough to see if the building blocks of some kind of mathematical, spatial, frequency-based language emerge. But before we begin our journey, we will pause here in the present day to notice some of the ways that we measure and tabulate the world around us. This is an important step, for how we count and measure things can be as revealing as why we count them. First, we will take a look at the way we measure time. For all practical purposes, the smallest unit is 1 second, and we all know it takes 60 seconds to make a minute, and then 60 of these minutes to make an hour. This hour, of course, is the unit by which we divide our days, and these days become months, years, decades, centuries, and so on. Speaking of 60, let's take a moment to notice that all geometry, whether three-dimensional, is also derived from base 60 mathematics that provide the foundation for a 360-degree circle, which in turn provides us with all the angles and formulas for creating virtually every shape known to humankind. Now let's look at how many cultures from all over the world have chosen to count and group things. Right away, we see that we have been attracted to the number 12. 12 eggs in a dozen, 12 months in a year, 12 inches in a foot, 12 signs of the zodiac. Strangely, whether it's tallying disciples or mythical gods, the number 12 appears often in the telling of our greatest stories about ourselves. And what about distance? Your local town might be measured in meters or other units, but when we talk about measuring our planet, the standards we all use revert back to base 60 units of miles, minutes, or geometrical degrees. Are you noticing the pattern here? We seem to be encountering a lot of 12s and 60s. Are they related? And if so, how? To answer that piece of the puzzle, we must travel roughly 5,000 years back in time to visit the ancient Sumerian culture of Mesopotamia, for here is where our 1260-based math comes from. This counting system, which was invented by the same people who produced the world's first written language, involved counting the knuckles of the 4 long fingers on one hand and then multiplying them by all 5 digits on the other hand. If you do this, you will get a maximum number of 12 knuckles times 5 fingers, which of course totals 60. How these cosmic jumps in language and mathematics occurred so suddenly is open to debate. But it is interesting to note that the ancient Sumerians themselves wrote about being given this information by sky god visitors they called the Anunnaki. Who and what the Anunnaki were is a hotly contested subject, but one thing that cannot be denied is the fact that over 5,000 years ago, a mathematical system was born that incredibly still serves us today. So now that we have our various units of measurement, all based on the Sumerian 1260 counting system, let's jump forward to a few pivotal moments in history and see what other numbers, patterns, and
Very interesting. Fascinating how the Sumerians gave us based 60 mathematics. We still use based 60 mathematics in our calendars, telling time and distance. There is an important pattern of 12s and 60s that it's said to have come to us from the Anunnaki. Now, the Anunnaki are, said to be by the Sumerians gods that came from another planet and gave Sumerians, because they're the ones that received it, all of this information, which I'd love to give a lecture on the Anunnaki just by themselves, because that's fascinating. Es fascinante como los sumerios nos dieron 60 bases de matemáticas. Todavía usamos matemáticas basadas en 60 en nuestros calendarios, contado de hora y las distancias. Hay un patrón importante de 12 y 60 que dice que nos ha llegado del Anunnaki. Y el Anunnaki, pues los Anunnaki son muy interesantes porque los sumerios dicen que eran los dioses que vinieron de otro planeta y que les dieron toda esta información a los sumerios. Y pues todavía usamos esa información en este día. Muy interesante, ¿no? Let's continue with the video and explore what other patterns, numbers, and synchronicities appear. Continuamos con el video y exploramos qué otros patrones, números y sincronicidades aparecen. Y aquí tenemos el video.
In the 6th century BC, on the Greek island of Samos, the famed mathematician Pythagoras led a school of thought that married philosophy, mathematics, music, and of course geometry. And while Pythagoras did not discover advanced geometry, he did apply it in new ways, especially to music. For instance, he noticed that when a tauten string was plucked, it would create a tone. And when that string was divided in half, it would make the same tone, only twice as high in pitch. Pythagoras then came up with numerical ratios based on harmonic fifths, and this led to the creation of the musical scale found at the root of most modern music. It is important to note that according to Pythagoras, all musical notes were found by using mathematics, and as such were given number values according to their placement in a kind of master grid. For instance, by using fifths beginning from note number 1, he was eventually guided to note 27. And to find the same note twice as high in pitch, he simply kept doubling it to 54, 108, 216, 432, and so on up the scale. If you've ever heard of Pythagorean tuning, you know that the number 432 is quite important. To Pythagoras himself, it probably wouldn't have stood out more than any other in his numerical grid. But in our quest to find a universal language based on mathematics and frequency, this particular note represents a significant piece of coincidental evidence. You see, many ancient musical instruments, from Tibetan bowls to Native American flutes, happen to produce the same tone, a tone that vibrates at 432 cycles per second. That's compelling, but even more intriguing is the fact that Pythagoras was not calculating vibration cycles to find tone 432. It just happens to be the same number. What's more, for decades, most modern musical instruments were also tuned to this same fourth octave A, with a value of 432 cycles. How could this be? Who chose this particular note as the keystone for instrument tuning, and more importantly, why? Here is where a deeper mystery begins to emerge, and to explore it we will need to go back to Pythagoras' other passion, geometry. It is not an exaggeration to say that to Pythagoras and his disciples, geometry and math held a key to the nature of all life everywhere, and maybe it does. Let's look at the first 4 geometric shapes, the circle, triangle, square, and pentagon. In each of them are angles of degrees that when added together always total a specific number relative to that particular shape. For instance, if we take a triangle, the sum total of all 3 interior angles is always 180. For both the square and circle it is 360. For a pentagon it is 540. Now at this moment, let's step back and look at these numbers in a different way, as there seems to be something about them that reaches beyond a simple sum of angles. Did you notice that they happen to be in the same numerical neighborhood as tone 432? What's more, they all add up to 9, just like 432. As an experiment, let's take a look at the numbers found in basic geometric shapes, then apply those numbers as vibration cycles to hear the tones they produce. First, let's listen to what the 180 total degrees contained in a triangle sound like. And here's a squares and circles 360 in cycles per second. A perfect octave up from the triangle. What about the pentagon at 540? That sounds like a harmonic fifth of the other two. That's interesting. What are these tones? They are F sharp and its perfect harmonic fifth of C sharp. Let's keep going. What does a hexagon 720 sound like? Another F sharp. Here's a 7-sided septagon, which totals 900. This is an A sharp, which happens to be the note required to complete an F sharp major chord in perfect 3-part harmony. And finally the octagon, where we get 1080, another C sharp. Suddenly, geometry is expressed by tones, and these tones just happen to create the most beautiful form of music, a perfect 3-part major chord in the key of F sharp. Is this something we've been missing for years? Is it important? To the famous philosopher and mathematician Plato, the answer would have been a resounding yes, for it is Plato who advanced the study of 2-dimensional geometry into 3-dimensional geometry, and who began to recognize that nature, whether expressed as a tone, the petal design of a flower or the spiraling design of a seashell seem to follow a 3D mathematical pattern. In fact, it became an obsession of Plato to try and find the simplest three-dimensional geometric shapes, and his quest ultimately revealed what we now call the Platonic solids. In essence, these forms represent the most elemental construction blocks found both in human-made and natural forms.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. Amazing how Pythagoras discovered how the planets, through geometry, vibrate in the key of F sharp major. That is so amazing, because F sharp major is not really a key that we use all the time because it's challenging. But hey, the planets can use it whenever they want, right? So it takes extremely higher level thinking to understand that shapes and sizes and numbers create frequencies and vibrations, and that through equations we can find those values. Let's continue with the video and continue observing sonic and sacred geometry. Es sorprendente como Pitágoras descubrió cómo los planetas, a través de la geometría, vibran en la clave de Fa sostenido mayor. Y Fa sostenido mayor no es una clave que usamos mucho en música porque hay muchos sostenidos. There's a lot of sharps. Pero se necesita un pensamiento de un nivel extremadamente superior para comprender que las formas, los tamaños y los números crean frecuencias y vibraciones, y que a través de ecuaciones podemos encontrar esos valores. Continuamos con el video y seguimos observando la geometría sagrada y sónica.
The tetrahedron, or a three-sided pyramid comprised of 4 interlocking triangles. As we did before, let's add up all the angles found in those 4 triangles. The answer, 720, which we have already seen is the tone F sharp. Next we have the cube, whose 6 360-degree squares totals 2160. What does it sound like? (2160) is a high C sharp, and as you will see later, a very interesting number for other reasons as well. Next up is the octahedron. Constructed of 8 triangles, this shape totals 1440, which is another perfect F sharp higher up the scale. The icosahedron is made up of 20 triangles, so the total number of degrees is 3600. As a tone, 3600 vibration cycles create the A sharp needed to complete yet another F sharp major chord that sounds like this. At this point, we have seen how 2- and 3-dimensional geometry can be expressed by the notes found in an F sharp major chord. Could this also be true with what is known as sacred geometry? To find out, we will first need to build a design called the germ of life, which, when repeated, goes on to reveal the seed of life, then flower of life pattern found at sacred sites all over the world. First, we start with a circle at 360 degrees, which is the familiar F sharp. We then add our second circle, bringing the total to 720, another F sharp. 3 circles totals 1080, which provides the harmonic fifth of C sharp. 4 circles is 1440, another F sharp. 5 circles totals 1800, or the A sharp needed to once again provide the harmonic third of an F sharp major chord. And finally the 6th circle, which brings the total to 2160, another C sharp. Amazing! It's as if we can now both see and hear the flower of life pattern that has intrigued humankind for thousands of years. So now we have 2-dimensional geometry, 3-dimensional geometry, and even sacred geometry being represented by different variations of an F sharp major chord. How is this not common knowledge? How have we missed this connection? There are actually 3 explanations. 1. For reasons ranging from the mundane to the conspiratorial, musical instruments are no longer tuned to an A vibrating at 432 cycles per second, but rather 440. 2. Modern tuning calls for equal temperament, which no longer adheres to Pythagoras' whole number simplicity. And 3. The tuning method required to reveal geometric shapes is based on a mathematical grid rather than mathematical ratios. This grid, if it had a name, would probably be called something like factor 9, because the number 9 is found not only in the sum of every note on the grid, but also as the number required to move up or down the scale. For instance, if we started at note A at 216 cycles, all we would have to do is add or subtract the number 9 to reveal all the other tones in that octave. And it is here, on this incredible factor 9 grid, that we find not just some of our geometric numbers, but all of them. Conversely, modern A440 tuning reveals not one correlation to geometric numbers. Now let's go back for a moment and take a look at one of these numbers, 2160, the number expressed by both the cube and the germ of life pattern. You may have already noticed that without the 0, it is exactly half of our magic 432. That's worth noting, but what is even more intriguing is the way this number keeps showing up in other large-scale measurements. To discover one of these measurements, we will need to jump forward from Plato's time to when the Mayan civilization was flourishing.
Now, here is where things get a little more interesting. The Mayans were a highly evolved people that figured out cyclical time and that the Earth wobbles on its axis. The Earth's axis wobbles. That causes the precession of the equinoxes. It is given as 25,920 years, divided by the ancient sos, or 60, which was used in calculations, results in, you guessed it, 432. The 60 is also relevant as the ratio of the distance to the moon from Earth and the Earth's radius, the number of seconds in a minute and minutes in an hour, and half the 120 years of man. Let's see how this wobble affects the way that we see things from the Earth. Aquí es donde las cosas se ponen más interesantes. Los mayas eran un pueblo altamente evolucionado que descubrió el tiempo cíclico y que la Tierra se bambolea sobre su eje. La oscilación del eje de la Tierra que causa la precesión de los equinoccios se da como 25.920 años, dividido por el antiguo sos, o 60, que se utilizó en los cálculos, da como resultado, ya lo tienen, ¿verdad?, 432. El 60 también es relevante como la relación entre la distancia de la Luna desde la Tierra y el radio de la Tierra, el número de segundos en el minuto y los minutos en una hora, y la mitad de los 120 años del hombre. Veamos cómo este bamboleo afecta la forma en que vemos las cosas desde la Tierra.
Roughly 1,500 years ago, Mayan stargazers were the most accomplished astronomers the world had ever known. Their concept of cyclical time led to many incredible discoveries: the accurate length of a year, the exact dates of seasonal changes, even the moments when solar and lunar eclipses would occur. But their most amazing discovery was of something known as the precession of the equinox, which makes note of a very slow wobble of Earth's axis. Somehow aware of the fact that this wobble takes 25,920 years to complete, the Mayans called this cycle one great year, with each of its 12 great months requiring 2160 Earth years to complete. And what about this? Did you know that the diameter of our moon, when measured in miles, also happens to total, you guessed it, 2160? Lastly, watch what happens when we apply simple division to this highly synchronous number. 2160 divided by 2 is 1080, the angle sum of the octagon. By 3, 720, the total of the hexagon. By 4, 540, the pentagon, By 5, are you ready? It's the ketone of 432. And by 6, 360, the number of both the square and circle. All F sharps and C sharps, with our 432A thrown into the mix, as if it were some kind of clue to solving a cosmic riddle. Maybe we should look at this number even more closely. As we've stated, our closest celestial neighbor, the moon, is 2160 miles across, and 216 is exactly half of 432. What about the other large object in our sky? Were you aware that our sun is 864,000 miles across? Incredibly, where the moon's base number sequence is half of 432, the sun's number sequence is exactly twice 432. And do you know how many seconds there are in a day? 86,400, or 43,200 for the 12 hours of day, and 43,200 for the 12 hours of night. Or try this. Take the 360 degrees found in the circular shape of our sun and moon, and then multiply it by the 12 hours of either day or night. The answer, 4320. Or how about this? What is the only whole number that when squared comes to within 0.01% accuracy to measuring the speed of light? 432. What is going on here? We have all these different things: Earth cycles, time and celestial measurements, geometry, sonic frequency, yet they are all represented by the same numbers over and over again. To answer that, we must search for the factor common to all of them, and that common factor is the 5,000-year-old Sumerian 1260 counting system. It is what gave us the inches to a foot, the seconds to a minute, and the 360 degrees in geometry. It's almost as if the sky god visitors, who the Sumerians called the Anunnaki, provided humanity with a counting system that would lead to the discovery of these synchronicities. Could it be that the number 432 really is some kind of cosmic key that unlocks a language of higher understanding? And if so, have these sky visitors ever been back to make sure we don't miss the importance of the 432 matrix? One possible answer can be found in the story of a man named George Van Tassel, a respected aeronautical engineer who believed he was contacted by extraterrestrial beings in the early 1950s. During this encounter, Van Tassel said he was provided with a mathematical formula that could be used for everything from time travel to sound frequency healing, and which he used to build the world-famous Integratron near Joshua Tree, California. What is this formula? It is F equals 1 over T, or frequency equals one particular something divided by the number of time. Well, what if that one something was the biggest one on our planet, the one great year of 25,920 discovered by the Mayans? And what if the number for time was the most logical choice of 60? Suddenly, this mysterious equation is expressed as frequency equals 25,920 divided by 60. Are you ready for the answer? It's 432. Not only the frequency that instruments all of the world have been tuned to for thousands of years, but also the number that reveals the synchronistic nature of life on this planet.
Imagine receiving a formula from an extraterrestrial that could be applied to anything and used for anything, even time travel. How can the number 432 have such power? Let's continue watching and discover more fascinating information of the 432 matrix and the Sumerian counting system. Imagínese recibir una fórmula de un extraterrestre que podría aplicarse a cualquier cosa y usarse para calcular cosas, incluso viaje en el tiempo. Me río porque es algo como que, no sé, sí es algo de otro mundo, este número. ¿Cómo puede el número 432 tener tanto poder? Sigamos mirando y descubramos más información fascinante de la matriz 432 y el sistema de conteo sumerio. Aquí es el último video que tenemos.
Noticing all these coincidences revealed by the 432 matrix and the Sumerian counting system, we must wonder if other ancient cultures were aware of them as well. Just scratching the surface, it would seem that they were. For example, let's take the Sumerian 12 and square it for a total of 144. Right off, we see that it is indeed a number and tone contained within our factor 9 grid. Expanding outward, we find 1440, then 144,000, which is a number that appears all over the world in the most compelling of ways. Take, for instance, the Great Pyramid of Giza. It happens to have been covered with 144,000 smooth white casing stones. To ancient Mayans, 144,000 days was the length of their 394-year Baktun, a time cycle which has just begun again. In the Bible, we read that there will be 144,000 chosen ones redeemed from the earth prior to the apocalypse. Obviously, number sequences like these have been significant to many different cultures and religious sects, and to one enigmatic group in particular, the Freemasons. Were the earliest Masons, the supposed keepers of sacred information, also aware of the Factor 9 grid, the 432 key, and the number 144,000? Their infatuation with the numbers 3 and 13 might be telling. For instance, if you divide 144,000 by 430, the answer is 333.3 into infinity. Or take a look at the back of a dollar bill. That famous unfinished pyramid could be revealing some interesting clues. For instance, there are 13 steps climbing the pyramid, and 13 times 33.3 is 432.9. Even the shape of the flat-topped pyramid appears to be made as if someone had drawn 4 dots in a line, then 3 above it, then 2 above that, and then connected those dots to reveal this iconic shape. And of course, let's not forget that the square root of our all-important Factor 9 grid is 3 threes. Who else knew about 432? The answer is surprising. In India, large cycles of time are called Kali Yugas, and each one is 432,000 years long. In fact, the number 432 appears so often in sacred structures and myths, from Stonehenge to the pyramids, that author Joseph Campbell could not help but see it as the most important mythological number in history. So what do we have here? What is it that's trying to be expressed by all of these coincidences? One answer is that over the course of history, we have been somehow guided toward both the subconscious creation and eventual conscious recognition of a grand pattern based on frequency, mathematics, time, space, and geometry. Quite possibly, these synchronistic numbers, shapes, and tones represent the building blocks of a language that we do not yet fully understand, but could turn out to be the most important language we will ever learn. How will we use it? Who will we be conversing with? Time will tell. Thousands of years ago, from locations all over the globe, various prophets, shamans, and seers described an era when humanity would make some kind of cosmic leap into a next level of consciousness. Here, at the dawning of the age of Aquarius and the start of a new Mayan Baktun cycle, maybe it's happening.
Imagine how the number 144,000 appeared in our history and also tells of our future. Are biblical accounts relevant in our past and also in the future? How can these numbers and equations reveal so much information about us as a human species? And then we get the Freemasons, the keepers of the information, and their fascination with the number 3 and 33. Imagínase ahora cómo apareció el número 144,000 en nuestra historia y también habla de nuestro futuro. ¿Son los relatos bíblicos relevantes en nuestro pasado y también en el futuro? ¿Cómo pueden estos números y ecuaciones relevar tanta información sobre nosotros como especie humana? Y luego tenemos los masones, los guardianes de la información y su fascinación por los números 3 y 33. The number 432 appears in every part of the world. What is that? What is it that is trying to be expressed by these coincidences? Is humanity truly going to make a cosmic leap in our next level of consciousness? El número 432 aparece en todas las partes del mundo. ¿Qué es lo que intenta ser expresado por todas estas coincidencias? ¿Realmente la humanidad va a dar un salto cósmico en nuestro próximo nivel de conciencia? Well, at this point, I would like to, for you, to place any questions or comments in the comment space. Llegados en este punto, me gustaría que pusieran cualquier pregunta o comentario en el espacio de comentarios. The last couple of lectures that I've given have included much information on the number 432. The music of the spheres, Sumerian counting system, how radio waves were created, and traveled through space, which can be picked up by microphones in space and converted into sound. Through these lectures, I am convinced that frequencies and vibrations do affect the human body. The frequencies and vibrations can heal or destroy. What we think is that we manifest. Therefore, we must be specific in what we think and how we feel, because it will create a vibration, which in the end will create our humanity, our human journey. Let us move forward in peace. Let us move forward in love. If not love for everyone, at least love for ourselves. Las últimas conferencias que he dado han incluido mucha información sobre el número 432, la música de las esferas, el sistema de conteo sumerio, cómo se crean y viajan las ondas de radio a través del espacio, que pueden ser captadas por micrófonos en el espacio y convertidas a sonar. A través de estas conferencias estoy convencido que las frecuencias y vibraciones afectan el cuerpo humano. Las frecuencias y vibraciones pueden curar o destruir. Lo que piensa uno es que lo que manifestamos. Por lo tanto, debemos ser muy específicos en lo que pensamos y en cómo nos sentimos, porque eso creará una vibración que al final creará nuestro viaje humano. Sigamos adelante en paz, sigamos adelante en el amor. Si no amor por todos, al menos amor por nosotros mismos. Okay, so let's look to see if there is a question, and there is. Tenemos una pregunta aquí. Maestro, ¿existen compositores que actualmente compongan en 432? ¿O qué música conoce que esté compuesta en esta frecuencia de afinación? So the question is, are there composers that actually compose music for the tuning, 432 tuning, vibration or hertz? And what music do I know that is written in this frequency or tuning? Y pues, sí, como el pasado, la persona, el compositor que le estaba, no quería que cambiara la frecuencia de afinación, era Verdi. Verdi todo el tiempo tenía sus instrumentos afinados a 432. So Verdi, the great opera and masterworks composer, would have his instruments tuned to 432 hertz. And he did this because he believed that the vibration or the frequency of the voice was in fact 432 hertz. Verdi creía que la frecuencia o la vibración de la voz era 432 hercios. Y pues por eso todo el tiempo afinaba todos los instrumentos a 432 hercios. Now, as far as music being tuned or composed at 432, sí lo hacían. In el Renacimiento, in the Renaissance, they would do this. Also in the classical era, they would do this. Y por esa razón, for this reason, cuando tenían sonatas, necesitaban que parar todo. They would have to stop everything and tune if the next section was in a different key. So, si tenemos la primera sesión, como que está en, vamos a decir que es mi bemol, right? So we have the first section in E flat major. Y el segundo sesión es en la quinta, si bemol, right? If the second section is in B flat major, everything would have to stop and they would have to tune to B flat major, because back then there was no equal temperament. And it was frustrating, and of course it was also not very well, not liked, because it would take a long time. So they developed the system where, everything was in tune and it was equal tempered. Teníamos todo este sistema donde la afinación era temperamento igual. It was equal. Y pues así no tenían que esperarse entre las sesiones de las sonatas en sinfónica. So, eso es lo que usamos ahorita. That's the system that we use now in these days when we hear a symphony, when we hear orchestras playing. They just play through it straight through because they're tuned in an equal temperament. So it's more of a tuning thing. It's not really that there's music composed for 432. I'm sure that there is. I've never actually heard it because I've only heard as a tuning model. So esa es mi respuesta, maestro. Espero que la respuesta estuvo bien para usted. So that was my response, and I hope that it was an okay response. Sometimes when we're giving lectures, we feel like we open ourselves to have questions and comments, because as teachers, as lecturers, we're put on the spot, right? Like, how much do you know? I want to know. If I have a question, I want you to answer it. Como alguien que da conferencias o un maestro, es bueno preguntar preguntas o si tienen dudas o cosas así al maestro, porque queremos saber que el maestro sí sabe lo que está hablando, y pues es muy importante. So, yeah. Is there any more questions or any more comments? Más preguntas, comentario? No? Okay. Well, it has been my pleasure to share this series, because it really was a series, of the music of the spheres and the 432 hertz, and how these frequencies really do affect our body. They affect our mood, and they really, they'll help us and they can destroy us. So one thing that I do is, thank you, Arthur, you rock too. So one thing that I do is when I meditate, I do play music on YouTube. You can go to any YouTube and put in a search and just put the number 432, and you'll be surprised what comes out. Cuando yo estoy en mi meditación, voy a YouTube y pongo música, y si ustedes hacen lo mismo, si ponen un search para el número 432, lo vas a sorprender lo que sale, porque hay muchísimas cosas y ayuda tanto. So with that, thank you very much for listening to this lecture, and I'm very happy to spend this time with you all, and I look forward to seeing you in future lectures. Muchas gracias por asistir, y me fascina estar con ustedes dando esta información, y espero verlos en conferencias en el futuro. Muchísimas gracias y que tengan buenas noches. Thank you and good night.
No cabe duda que los números siempre han sido complejos e interesantes. Esperamos que esta conferencia haya sido de su agrado y los invitamos a que la siguiente semana no se pierdan nuestra siguiente conferencia, ya que el maestro René Guerrero nos hablará acerca del multiverso de las 6 cuerdas, adentrándonos a las guitarras clásicas. Yo soy Rigo Cisnado, esto fue CAF Virtual, nos vemos la próxima semana.
Audio Jungle.